Welcome to Anime Recaps. In this video, we will explain Great Pretender. This anime tells the story of a Japanese con artist caught by a professional conman from France, thus making him involved in a bigger fraud case than he had ever imagined before. Although he had time to regret his actions, he returned to fraud to help people he cared about. So how did the fraud take place? Let's find out in Great Pretender. Great Pretender begins by showing a middle-aged man named Kudo, who visits the house of an old woman named Mrs. Kim to offer tap water purification products. But she refused because there was already another salesman named Makoto Edamura who was offering a water purifier in her house. Makoto then offers a water purification product that costs much more but is claimed to be able to eliminate harmful germs and bacteria by as much as 90%. Mrs. Kim finally agreed to buy the product because she put her health first. Unexpectedly, it turned out that Makoto and Kudo are co-workers who work at the same company. Not only that, they are the con men. The next day, Makoto was about to launch his action by tricking a French man named Laurent Thierry, visiting Japan. He pretended to return Laurent's wallet containing the money. Laurent gave him some money and hugged him as an expression of gratitude. However, when Makoto got home, he realized that he had been tricked by Laurent, who actually exchanged their wallets, so he brought a wallet full of papers. But it didn't stop there. Suddenly, Makoto's residence was raided by several police officers who wanted to arrest him for committing fraud. Makoto and Kudo rushed to escape from there. After that, Makoto accidentally met again with Laurent, who was about to head to the airport. He then follows Laurent, who plans to go to Los Angeles. Laurent then puts a candy box into Makoto's bag and invites him to go to Ella together. Makoto seemed to agree because right now, the only option he had was to flee from Japan as soon as possible. Upon arrival in LA, Makoto tells Laurent that he will continue to follow him until he returns the money. Knowing that Laurent is a merchant and wants to offer his wares to his client, Makoto then challenges him that he will sell the merchandise for twice the price offered by Laurent. Laurent accepted the challenge, and whoever came out victorious had the right to make the loser his assistant. Laurent and Makoto then visit the residence of a film producer named Eddie Casano. They were both greeted by Eddie's bodyguard, a man named Salazar, who immediately brought them before Eddie. Laurent tells Makoto that Eddie is a famous drug lord in Hollywood and that being a film producer is just a cover. Laurent intends to sell a special drug produced in candy form named Sakura Magic to Eddie, and introduces Makoto as the only person who can make Sakura Magic. Eddie then asked a girl named Abby to try Sakura Magic, and was so impressed with the effects of the drug that he planned to buy it from Laurent for $5 million. Laurent assures Eddie that the price is very worth it because he can hold the exclusive rights and be the only person to market the product, which will make a huge profit. Moreover, Sakura Magic will pass the urine test, so the police will not think it is a drug. After that, Laurent stuffed Sakura Magic into Makoto's mouth, forcing him to swallow it. Unexpectedly, Makoto showed a fairly extreme reaction and tried to run away from Eddie's house. Seeing that Makoto has run away, Laurent tells Eddie that he will try to convince Makoto and asks Abby to persuade him because Makoto seems interested in her. Laurent managed to find Makoto's whereabouts through the tracker implanted in Makoto's tie hook. Makoto, angry with Laurent for wanting to turn himself into a drug dealer, then tries to attack him. But then, Abby comes and knocks Makoto out. The scene then switches to the past, where Makoto takes care of his mother in the hospital. Then, he worked as a salesman in a small company that sold tea products. There, he meets Kudo, who is his boss. But as it turned out, the company had committed fraud, and Kudo was known to have committed fraud many times. Makoto was immediately named a suspect and served a prison sentence of 18 months. After being released from prison, Makoto is faced with the fact that his mother died and no company wants to hire him because he is a recidivist in a fraud case. However, after Kudo got out of prison, Makoto met him and decided to cooperate with him and become the con man completely. Turning to the present, Laurent finally reveals that Sakura Magic is just an ordinary candy, and Abby is only acting to convince Eddie. He then revealed that the reason for recruiting Makoto was that Eddie asked Laurent to bring the Sakura Magic's maker. Makoto was the best con artist recommended by Laurent's associate, none other than Mrs. Kim and Kudo. In addition, Laurent explained that he is a gentleman thief who only targets rich and corrupt people who negatively influence society. He uses the scams to expose his targets for their misdeeds while helping those who were victimized by their targets live honest and happy lives. Laurent thought that Makoto had lost and asked him to be his assistant. That night, Makoto tries to escape from the hotel room but is immediately blocked by Abby. Abby said she never trusted Laurent even though they worked together because she only trusted herself, and Makoto should do the same. But Makoto still decided to leave from there. The next day, Laurent and Abby finally had to devise another plan because Makoto never returned. However, Laurent and Abby were surprised when they found out that Makoto was already at Eddie Kasano's house and managed to double the value of their contract to $10 million. In that way, it was Makoto who won the bet. He approached Eddie personally and managed to move him emotionally so that Makoto managed to double the price and promised to give him the Sakura magic recipe. However, Eddie doesn't necessarily trust Makoto and orders some of his subordinates to prove Makoto's credibility as a chemist developing a special drug. Makoto immediately panicked because he didn't expect it before. But as it turned out, Laurent had thought of all the possibilities and sent Mrs. Kim and Kudo to disguise themselves as Makoto's co-workers at the Japanese Chemical Research Institute. With the help of the two of them, Makoto was finally saved, and Eddie now trusted him completely. On the other hand, a man was seen spying on Eddie Kasano's residence from an apartment building. The man is Inspector Anderson, an LAPD detective who has been chasing after Eddie Kasano for years. Since Eddie and Laurent were going to make the deal elsewhere, Anderson and the other cops rushed after them. Eddie outwits the cops and manages to escape. However, it is revealed that Anderson is a corrupt cop who receives bribes from Eddie every month, so he will always let Eddie off the hook. When Eddie and Laurent finally arrived at the place where they were going to do the transaction, which turned out to be a drug manufacturing factory, Eddie then asked Makoto to show him how to make Sakura magic in front of him. Not thinking about it beforehand, Makoto said that he couldn't make Sakura magic in such a dirty place, so Eddie ordered his men to renovate the place to be like Makoto's exact same laboratory so that Makoto could make Sakura magic. Elsewhere, Anderson returns to the reconnaissance spot where he meets a female FBI agent named Paula Dickens, who takes over Anderson's investigation of Eddie Kasano. She thought that Anderson was completely incompetent at his job and said she had known about him always taking bribes from Eddie. Meanwhile, Eddie orders Salazar to keep an eye on Makoto during the factory renovation. For the time being, Makoto will stay at Salazar's house. He knows that Salazar has a son named Tom, placed in foster care. Makoto then invites Tom and Salazar to go to the playground, where Makoto meets Paula Dickens and Anderson, who offers him a deal to work together to catch Eddie Kasano and Laurent Thierry together. However, if Makoto refuses, then he will be imprisoned. He is given a pair of glasses as a tracking device. That night, Makoto hesitates and asks Paula to release Salazar because he feels sorry for Tom when his father is in prison. But Paula refuses because Salazar is Eddie Kasano's accomplice. A few days later, when the factory was completely renovated, and Makoto was about to demonstrate the making of Sakura magic to Eddie and everyone else, Paula Dickens and the FBI agents were ready to go on a raid. After knowing how to make Sakura magic through the video Laurent showed earlier, Makoto finally managed to get Sakura magic, and Laurent praised him as a great con artist. When the making of Sakura magic was finished, and Eddie had prepared $10 million in cash to give to Laurent and Makoto, suddenly Paula and the FBI agents raided them all. During the raid, it was revealed that Makoto had cooperated with the FBI and betrayed them all. An angry Abby then tries to grab Salazar's gun and puts up a fight, but the FBI agents immediately opened fire on her. Seeing this, Laurent did not stay silent and immediately protected Abby, causing himself to be shot by the FBI agents. Makoto is shocked to see his two comrades killed, then takes Paula hostage and asks Salazar to run away from there. On the other hand, Eddie tries to blow up the factory and escape. Makoto tries to stop Eddie and knock him out with Salazar's help. Eddie is immediately brought before Paula, where Makoto sees Laurent and Abby's bodies covered in cloth. Paula was about to interrogate Eddie, who immediately offered her some money to free him. Paula then asked Eddie Kasano for $100 million if he didn't want evidence of his involvement in drug making to fall into the hands of the FBI. Hearing this, Makoto was very surprised and angry because he thought that Paula had used him and caused his two comrades to die just for her own sake. However, Eddie agreed to Paula's request and immediately transferred the funds from his Swiss bank account. After that, he asks Paula to put all the charges on Salazar so that he gets the harshest punishment, while Eddie walks free from there. Makoto was getting angrier at that, but suddenly someone knocked him out. Some time passed, and Makoto woke up on the beach, where he saw Paula Dickens and Laurent and Abby, who was still alive. Paula later revealed that her real name was Cynthia, and the FBI agents who carried out the raid were Laurent's associates. They managed to trick Eddie Kasano and put him in jail, while Salazar is now living happily with Tom. In addition, Laurent and his associates manage to get $110 million after defrauding Eddie Cassano. After distributing the money from the fraud, they rush back to their respective homes. But it turns out that Makoto is still undecided about his life choice as the con man and finally parts with Laurent and the others. After returning to Japan, Makoto gave his share of the money to the police station and turned himself in. Some time has passed since the biggest fraud committed by Makoto, who joined Laurent's gang. Makoto is now living his last days in prison because he will soon be free. The day before his release, he gets a job offer as a mechanic at a heavy equipment factory. Makoto did not waste this opportunity because he wanted to start a new life and work honestly. Meanwhile, Laurent and Abby are seen helping Cynthia trick a man who frequently sexually harasses his employees by bankrupting him and trapping him in an underground fight. Cynthia tricks the man into wanting to help her friend, a woman named Chris, who was fired from her job for refusing to be abused by him. After release from prison, Makoto works as a mechanic at the Nakanoshima Heavy Equipment Factory, where he is assigned to repair airplane propellers. One day, Makoto's boss told him about the annual air race. One of the air racing teams named Confidence is looking for a mechanic, and his boss recommends Makoto join the team to increase his experience as a mechanic. At first, Makoto refused the offer, but after being convinced by his boss, he finally agreed to join the air racing team. But it turns out it was all Laurent's ploy to bring Makoto back into his team because they were about to commit a bigger fraud than in LA. Laurent, Abby, and Cynthia plan to participate in the Pathfinder Air Race, which will be held in Singapore in 2 months. They are targeting the tournament's organizers, Sam and Clark Ibrahim, who are suspected of monopolizing air race results for their own benefit. Although Clark was a great pilot, his older brother, Sam, controlled the match and ensured Clark's victory by bribing the other participants to lose the tournament. However, when the air race was held in Australia some time ago, one of the air racers, Louis Mueller, refused to give up on Clark and fought to win the tournament. Louis, an aerial stunt pilot and former pilot in the United States military, refuses to give in to Clark and wants to prove to everyone that he is a great pilot. But then, when he faced Clark in the final round and almost reached the finish line, suddenly, his plane suffered a malfunction that caused it to crash. Louis managed to survive the accident, but he had to sit in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. After the accident, Louis became frustrated, and his life took a turn for the worse. Luckily, he had Isabelle, his wife, who was always loyal to him in any situation. Therefore, Laurent intends to deceive the Ibrahim brothers, especially Sam, to stop the monopoly business they are doing in the air racing tournament. By appointing Abby as pilot and Cynthia as team owner, they intend to attract the attention of the Ibrahim brothers and the audience because they are the first female team to compete in the Pathfinder air race. But on the other hand, Abby seems to have her own problems because she seems to have lost focus several times and almost had an accident while flying her plane. She seemed to be reminded of her painful past. Meanwhile, Cynthia tries to approach Sam to fix the match so Abby can advance to the final against Clark. Cynthia tries to seduce Sam by giving him her cell phone number. He was lured by the bait and immediately invited her to meet the next day. Abby managed to pass the preliminary round and now faces an experienced pilot named Tudu. But as it turns out, Sam had ordered Tudu to beat Abby because he didn't want Clark to face a woman in the final round. Sam thought women didn't deserve to be the center of attention that people admired and deserved to stay home and care for their families. So naturally, Cynthia is furious when Sam lowers her self-esteem as a woman. But then, Abby surprisingly beats Tudu and proves to the Ibrahim brothers and everyone else who watched the match that a woman can succeed in a male-dominated match. Next, Laurent asked Louis Mueller and his wife, Isabelle, for help. But Louis refuses because Laurent and his associates just want to bankrupt Sam, while Louis intends to kill the Ibrahim brothers for handicapping him for life. Isabelle then helps Laurent to convince Sam Ibrahim to let him recruit Makoto as a mechanic. With Mrs. Kim's help, Sam is finally interested in recruiting Makoto after he finds out about an underground casino that makes Pathfinder aerial racing a gambling event. So Sam, disguised as an ordinary man named Mike, asks Makoto to take him to an underground casino. Since Sam was in control of the game's outcome, he won several bets, draining Laurent and his associates' savings considerably. On the other hand, Abby, who knew from Laurent that Louis was a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, then urged Laurent to provide all the information about Louis. According to information, Louis used to be a fighter pilot of the United States Air Force who was tasked with bombing the city of Baghdad. In the bombing incident, Abby's parents died, and Abby, who was still a child, was forced to become a child soldier. She intends to take revenge on Louis Mueller for the death of her parents and the suffering she endured after her parents died and the town she lived in was destroyed. Meanwhile, because Sam keeps winning, he is finally kicked out of the underground casino. Seeing Sam annoyed by this, Makoto then offered to help him place bets at the underground casino. With Makoto's help, Sam bets on the victory of a male racer named Ko. But then, Cynthia and Abby rigged Ko's engine in the same way Sam rigged Lewis' engine a while ago. Because Ko lost the match, Sam lost $2.5 million, which made him very angry, and he almost killed Makoto with his gun. After Sam's anger subsides, Makoto suggests that Sam return to the underground casino and try to enter there with his true identity as Sam Ibrahim. A few days before the final between Clark and Abby is held, Sam visits the underground casino and convinces the manager that he is not in control of the game's outcome by asking Cynthia to bet $100,000 on Abby's win, while Sam will bet $25 million on Clark's win. Meanwhile, Cynthia asks Makoto to cheat Clark's plane engine so they can win the bet and bankrupt Sam Ibrahim. However, when the day of the final match arrived, Makoto and Abby did not follow Laurent's orders. Instead, they allowed Lewis to compete against Clark because Lewis did not want revenge on the Ibrahim brothers. Lewis, who loves flying, wants to experience the excitement once again as he takes on a real race with Clark without obeying Sam's orders, where the two of them can do their best and compete freely regardless of the outcome. Unfortunately, when the match finally started, Clark immediately found out that it wasn't Abby who was flying the plane, but Lewis. However, Clark, who really wanted to have a rematch with him, didn't mind it and instead looked very excited. Long story short, Clark eventually won the match, but Lewis seemed very satisfied because he could actually race with him. But on the other hand, Laurent manages to trick Sam by showing Abby's victory in the underground casino. He apparently had anticipated Makoto's decision not to cheat Clark's plane engine, so Laurent and his associates manipulated the game's outcome at the underground casino to trick Sam Ibrahim. When Sam finally exits the casino, he realizes that he has been tricked by Laurent because the real winner is Clark. Meanwhile, Laurent and his associates immediately took care of everything and fled on a boat with all the money belonging to Sam Ibrahim. An enraged Sam tries to kill Makoto and Abby, but they manage to escape by jumping off the top of the building and flying a parachute. The story continues and shows Laurent, who is with Cynthia in France. First, they visit Makoto, working at a sushi restaurant run by a Chinese man. But that day, he was fired from his job for going against his boss' orders. Makoto then took Laurent and Cynthia to the boarding house, where he rented a room while living in France. A house owner is Sebastian, who runs a diner and boarding house with his daughter Marie. Cynthia seemed intrigued by a painting on the wall, which she said was very similar to a painting by Sergio Montoya. She asks Sebastian about the origin of the painting, but he doesn't know because the painting has been around since his father ran the place. Following Sebastian's advice, Makoto decides to apologize to his boss at the sushi restaurant so he can get back to work. But apparently, Makoto's boss was being scolded by a male customer named James Coleman, who made scathing criticism of the sushi dishes served by the restaurant. Because of that, Makoto's boss intends to close the restaurant and return to China. Arriving at the boarding house, Makoto is surprised by Sebastian, who says he wants to sell the house to pay off his debt. But unfortunately, Makoto discovered that Sebastian was in debt, and the amount was not small. He then went to a cafe to calm down and accidentally met James, who was seen talking to someone on the phone. An idea suddenly crossed Makoto's mind, so he rushed back to Sebastian's house. Makoto asks how much money Sebastian needs to pay his debt. Sebastian said that he needed at least 20,000 euros. Makoto then told him that he would buy a painting similar to Sergio Montoya's for 20,000 euros. Makoto then contacted Cynthia and explained his plan to her. He asks her to gather several people, including Abby and Kudo, and keep their plans a secret from Laurent because Makoto doesn't want him to be involved in his plot to trick James Coleman into helping Sebastian. Long story short, Makoto followed James, who was about to visit an antique shop. Kudo distracts the shopkeeper, while Abby and Cynthia disguise themselves as shopkeepers, then display the painting they took from Sebastian's diner and try to convince James to buy the painting. However, after seeing James, Cynthia rushed away from there because it turned out that James Coleman was an art critic and a renowned antique auctioneer in England. On the other hand, James was interested in buying the painting for 25,000 euros. Their plan worked successfully, and Makoto immediately handed over the money from the painting sale to Sebastian and Marie. But then, they watched the news on television showing James Coleman. He explains that he has found the missing Sergio Montoya painting, entitled Snow in London, which is none other than the painting in Sebastian's diner. Not only that, the price of the painting is estimated at 20 million euros. Knowing this, Makoto is very upset and plans to take the painting back, but Laurent and Kudo suggest he give up. On the other hand, Cynthia apparently agreed with Makoto to reclaim the painting. The next day, Laurent and Abby went to an auction held by James Coleman, where they saw a woman named Farrah Brown, who always managed to get art auctioned by James. After the auction was over, Abby approached James and begged him to be hired as his assistant, but he refused the request. Meanwhile, Makoto and Kudo are tasked with spying on Farrah Brown, who is a wealthy woman, and making James Coleman her advisor in the arts. With their ingenuity, they managed to gain access to the storage room of the artwork purchased by Farrah from the auction. Farrah is willing to spend a lot of money to buy these paintings to please James because she really has fallen in love with him, so she doesn't realize that James has taken advantage of her. James went to Farrah's house and asked her to buy a painting Snow in London for 20 million euros. He did that on purpose so that the painting would remain his, and he would earn a lot of money. The scene then switches to the past when Cynthia was very young and trying hard to achieve her dream of becoming an actress. She worked as a waitress in a cafe to make ends meet, where she first met and befriended Chris. There, Cynthia met a man named Thomas Mayer, a street painter by profession. He was very talented at painting and sold his paintings for a living. Thomas and Cynthia's relationship grew closer, and they both finally officially started dating. When visiting Thomas's house, Cynthia was amazed because Thomas could imitate masterpiece paintings from famous painters very well. However, Thomas told her that his favorite painter was Sergio Montoya, and he still had a hard time imitating Sergio Montoya's paintings. Turning back to the present, Abby looks still trying to get close to James at the auction, but he still ignores her. In the auction, Laurent deliberately overestimated Farrah's price for the painting Snow in London, and he got the painting for 30 million euros. James looks very angry and scolds Farrah for not being able to get the painting Snow in London, even though she has a lot of money. After that, James finally hires Abby and tells her to spy on Laurent. Meanwhile, Cynthia has to sell some of her real estates to get the real Snow in London painting and intends to trick James Coleman into getting her money back. Therefore, Laurent intends to make a copy of the painting Snow in London and resell it to James. Then, turning to the past, James approached Thomas, who was selling his paintings on the side of the road. Impressed by Thomas' talent in painting, James recruited him to create lost artworks from famous artists that James would then verify and sell. Seduced by the high cost, Thomas accepted the offer. Over time, Thomas created a copy of the painting, and James pretended to find it, confirming that it was the original and auctioning it off for a fantastic price. As a result, Thomas's life changed drastically, and now he no longer has financial problems. But on the other hand, Cynthia began to worry about Thomas because she realized that James had taken advantage of him. The two of them then quarreled, and Cynthia decided to leave Thomas. After Cynthia left, Thomas finally realized his mistake, but it was too late. He again fell into misery and hid because he was in debt of £2 million sterling. Turning to the present, Makoto tries to find Thomas' whereabouts and learns about the debt he owes. He then saves Thomas, who is being ganged up by thugs, and asks him to meet Cynthia, who asks Thomas to imitate Sergio Montoya's Snow in London painting. However, Thomas refused Cynthia's request because he was no longer painting. On the other hand, Abby reports to James about Laurent often selling paintings at high prices to a mob boss from South Korea and a Yakuza leader from Japan. Meanwhile, Makoto tries to persuade Thomas to accept the offer because Cynthia promises to pay off Thomas' debts. However, Thomas tells Makoto that he feels guilty for making a copy of a famous painter's painting. Thomas, who realized his mistake, then bought all the imitation paintings, even though he had to spend all the money he had and owed. When Makoto said that Cynthia highly praised Thomas's painting talent, Thomas finally agreed to make a copy of Sergio Montoya's Snow in London. Although it was complicated to imitate Sergio Montoya's painting, Thomas tried hard to make the painting with all his heart, until finally, he could finish the work, and the painting looked very similar to the real thing. After that, Abby goes to James and gives him an invitation to attend an underground auction held by Laurent, where Laurent plans to sell the painting Snow in London there. Long story short, Farrah is seen preparing a sum of £50 million sterling to buy the painting Snow in London according to James' wishes, even though she has to sell some of her real estates. Mrs. Kim pretends to be a mob boss from South Korea at the auction, while Kudo will disguise himself as a Yakuza leader, and they will pretend to fight over the painting Snow in London. James and Farrah were visibly mesmerized by the opulence's venue and the artwork on offer at a fantastic price when the auction started. Seeing this, Farrah then asked her butler, Tim, to prepare another £20 million just in case, but he refused because Tim didn't want her to be used by James. After that, Abby was seen approaching Farah and giving her something that made her very surprised. The painting Snow in London was valued at over £50 million at the auction. Even Cynthia bid the painting for £70 million. Not wanting to lose, James continued to increase his bid to reach £100 million, finally making Cynthia surrender. Laurent then set the painting Snow in London by Sergio Montoya sold for £100 million. However, when the payment was to be made, Farah never came, so James was desperate to pay for the painting with his own money and planned to sell the painting to her. But apparently, Farah refuses to meet James because she feels hurt after Abby gives James a voice recording which openly says that he only wants to take advantage of Farah because of her wealth and has never loved her. Farah, who looked gloomy, moved the entire artwork collection into her house. After that, Tim seemed to comfort Farah and said he would always be by her side. Elsewhere, Makoto, Cynthia, and Laurent returned to Sebastian and Marie to return the painting Snow in London. But Marie immediately realized that the painting was different from before. Makoto finally admits that the original painting has been handed over to James, and the painting given to them is a painting by Thomas. Makoto said that Thomas had worked hard to make the painting, and he wanted Thomas's work to be displayed there. Marie and Sebastian said they didn't mind it at all. Marie then said that Thomas's painting looks better than the original because it is clear that Thomas pours all his feelings into the painting, so the atmosphere emitted by his painting feels warm and calming. Makoto and the others thought the same. The first season of this anime is finally finished. The moral that can be learned from this anime is never to deceive others, even with good intentions. But, sometimes, to help others who are oppressed, it takes more than a strong will and a sincere heart, because those who oppress them usually have power that will be difficult to overthrow honestly, so we must choose cunning ways to repay them.